Out at times, if you come in, find a seat. All right, welcome to the closing keynote. We are almost finished with our 2025 annual meeting. I hope it has been a good one for you. It has been for me. I've really enjoyed being on the program committee with Caroline. It's been a blast. We've had a great time. And I am hoping that this closing keynote will provide a fitting Las Vegas closing to our meeting. So it is my before Caroline tells me. After the keynote and before the members meeting, Lindsay and the AMR team tell me they will have snacks outside, so if you want to go grab a snack and a drink after the keynote and before the members meeting, feel free to do that. And now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Tony Barnhart. He's a cognitive scientist and an associate professor of psychological science at Carthage College and a part-time professional magician. He borrows hypotheses and techniques from magic to study attention and perception in the laboratory and has authored both empirical and theoretical works on the interface of science and magic. A leader in this burgeoning field, he was a founding member of the Science of Magic Association and frequently appears in national and international media. Most recently, his work was featured on an episode of CBC's The Nature of Things with David Suzuki, devoted to the science of magic. He regularly teaches a college course devoted to the cognitive science of magic. So please welcome Dr. Tony Barnhart.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Big church vibes, though. Nobody's seated in the front. You will be picked on, regardless of where you're seated, so deal with that. So I'm really excited to be here. I don't pass up an opportunity to come back to Las Vegas. Pro tip, every presentation should begin with an image that'll both distract from what you're saying and haunt your audience's dreams for weeks to come. You're welcome. And so I really do love that image. It was created by a Dutch artist named Ronald Blomstein. It's meant to address the attentional limitations in the tech era, in the digital age. But I also think it's a great representation of the kind of pressures that are put upon you when you visit a magic show, right? You are bombarded with all sorts of sensory stimulation, way more information than you can actually process. And so you have to deploy attention to pick and choose those pieces of the environment that are worthy of further processing. Well, how do you pick what's important? And how much of those choices is made by the environment and not by you? So I was brought here today because we're in Vegas. And if you drive down the strip, you see that every casino has a major magic show in it. And these are not just great performers who are doing these shows. These are informal cognitive scientists. Magicians are armchair psychologists. They have to have hypotheses about how the mind works in order to figure out ways to deceive that mind. And as she mentioned, I teach a whole course on the cognitive science of magic that takes its inspiration from the methods of magicians to inform our understanding of cognitive science. I can't do justice to this burgeoning field of psychological science today, so I'm going to zoom in on one little piece of the story. I'm going to zoom in on the eyes. The eyes are a rich source of information and of influence. And magicians have capitalized on the statement from Cicero, I think, that the eyes are a window to the soul. In fact, lots of magicians, old-timey advertising from magicians, featured their eyes. There's Houdini, of course. Check out this dude's eyes. Also nightmare material. But that dude can peer right into your soul, for sure. So what is it that makes the eyes so compelling? Well, magicians feign their ability to read minds, but we're all actually born with an ability to read minds using the eyes, right? We're all intimately sensitive. We're attuned to what other people's eyes are doing, even if you aren't aware that you're attuned to it. You've all been in a room where one person has been gazing in a weird direction, and you felt that urge to figure out what the heck they're looking at. That's called gaze following, and it is a form of mind reading, right? We're using another person's eyes to make inferences about their mental states, or at least the current focus of their attention. And it's been suggested that we evolved these enlarged sclera, the whites of our eyes, to facilitate this kind of mind reading. In fact, if you look at our closest relatives in the animal kingdom, the African great apes, they don't have enlarged sclera like us. And they are not sensitive to social gaze cues. If you get a full-grown ape and a very young baby, that young human baby will gaze follow. It'll follow the eye movements of its parent. The full-grown ape, insensitive to such eye movements. Sensitive to where the head is pointed, but insensitive to what the eyes are doing. So eyes are important, and magicians are aware of this. The single most powerful tool magicians have is their own eye movements. They will use their eye movements to tell you where important information is likely to be. And because we have this intense need to gaze follow, audience members look where the magician is looking. Now, I may have just done something very stupid. I've told you this key point about how magicians deceive you, and I'm about to do a magic trick that uses that very tool repeatedly. Cool thing, though, even knowing about this gaze following doesn't make you immune to it. This is such an overlearned behavior, you're going to give in. You can't help it, and you're not going to know you're doing it, which is remarkable. All right, so I spent the greater part of a decade in Arizona. Wild West. And when you move away from, they don't let you move away from Arizona until you have two things under your belt. Make some bitchin' salsa. I got that one. I can do some salsa. And second, you have to be well attuned to old Western movies. Do we have any fans of old Western movies among us? Do we have any, Texans? I bet we've got some Texans among us. Ashlyn's a Texan. Ashlyn is a Texan. Ashlyn, would you be willing to help me with something? Let's give Ashlyn some encouragement to step up to the stage. She didn't know this was going to happen. Thank you so much, Ashlyn. You can take the long path, or there are stairs over here, or you can take the big step. Thank you, Ashlyn. You're right or left-handed, Ashlyn?
I'm right-handed.
All right, come on over here. Stand right here on the trapdoor. All right, so we're going to recreate an old Western movie for the audience here this afternoon. Ashlyn, have you ever done any acting?
One-act play in high school.
One-act play in high school. That gets the job done. You're going to be playing a role, Ashlyn. You're going to be playing the role of the good and honest Sheriff Ashlyn. Smack that thing right on there.
I left my bandana over there. I actually brought my own bandana.
I love it. And I also have for you, so I wanted to bring a gun, but guns are far too dangerous, far too expensive for this low-budget show. So I have for you the next best thing, the Ginsu rope shears of death. We'll try that again. The Ginsu rope shears of death. Yeah, that's what I thought the first time I heard about them. We also just happen to have a holster for the Ginsu rope shears of death. Ashlyn, if you would kindly place that around your waist, Velcro that puppy in the front, make sure the holster ends up on your right side since you're right-handed. It slides.
Okay. Just Velcro it?
Perfect, great. No, it's
inside
out. It's fine. We're gonna flip the whole thing.
Sorry.
Did you hear about the three-legged dog that walked into the saloon?
No.
He said, "I'm looking for the man that shot my paw." They don't get better either. All right, hey, put those scissors into the holster, Ashlyn. Now, you have one role here. Every time I say draw, partner, your job is to pull out those scissors as fast as you can without harming anyone in the front row or me. Private college insurance sucks. All right, so shake out that tension, Sheriff. And draw, partner. All right, put them back. We also just happen to have a cowboy. Nope, no more rehearsal necessary. We also just happen to have a cowboy's best friend, aside from his horse, a length of rope. Now, I suspect you were not prepared for like a deep philosophical discussion on the last day of this conference. But Ashlyn, can you tell everyone why this is a length of rope? What's the operational definition of a length of rope?
Starts and stops.
Starts and stops. I like that. We could also say it has two ends and a middle, right? I think that would be a good definition of a length of rope. Now, hypothetically, Ashlyn, if we were to cut the rope at its center, what would that leave us with? Two equal lengths of rope, a math major. I love it. So draw, partner. It's getting better. And cut the rope at its center for me. All right, let's see how she did here. Put those back in the hole. Oh, gee. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right, so it's not exactly equal. That's fine. You'll get other chances to redeem yourself. Now, tell me, Sheriff Ashlyn, you ever have to hitch the horses to the wagon?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. So you're all over this. You know how you do it. You just tie two loops in the rope, one around each of the horses' necks. So the only way to get the horses off of the rope is to cut their necks, right? Whoa! What kind of sheriff are you? Texan. What would Walker do? Draw, partner. I caught you off guard. And cut the rope right next to the knot, keeping in mind that the white stuff's the rope and the pink stuff's the fingers. All right, right? Yeah, right there. That's great. We'll do the same down at this end, just next to the knot. And you can put those scissors back into the holster so nobody gets hurt. All right. Should we do some magic? It's a long way to come for no magic. Sheriff, would you kindly, gently blow on that knot, just a little breeze? Ooh. She's been chewing that tobacco a little. Here, give that one a try. A little more on that one. We'll come back to that one. Give that one a try. Oh! Hey, one more on there. What should we do? No, she's scissor happy. You know what? Let's start all over. This is a length of rope. It is a length of rope. Thank you for the thunderous round of applause. You're not done. Jeez. No, don't threaten me with my own scissors. Let's try it again. Draw, partner. That was good. And cut the rope at its center for me. Give it a go. All right. And you can put those scissors back in the holster. Let's see how she did here this time. We're getting closer, but we're running out of time here. Luckily, we happen to have the powers of magic on our side this afternoon, which allow us to stretch the ropes. No, that's no good. Let's start all over. Thanks. This is, by the way, the most redundant trick in all of magic. Yeah. Tell me, Sheriff. Hear about the two cowboys that met in the outhouse? No. Not what you're thinking. One was already parked there. The other one went in to take down his britches, and a $5 bill fell out of his pocket down into the hole of the outhouse. Well, he reaches in his pocket, pulls out a 20, throws it down there with the 5. Second cowboy says, now what'd you do that for? First cowboy says, I ain't going down there for just $5. Thanks. Hey, a rope trick. Draw, partner. And cut the rope at its center for me. I'm feeling good about this one. Let's see how she did. Oh, perfect. Perfection. Here, you take your half. I'll take mine. Would you tie the two ends together in like a square knot or whatever kind of knot you got? I wasn't a Boy Scout, so I won't judge. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
That's like better than mine. Hey, so draw, partner, and cut my rope opposite the knot, right around that vicinity. We'll do the same with yours, just opposite the knot. Thanks, and put those scissors back into the holster. Here, you take a hold of the end of yours. I'll take a hold of mine. Yeah, yours is like way better than mine. Let me tighten this up. Did you know those are magic scissors, Sheriff?
No.
Oh, they are. Would you wave the magic scissors ever so gently over my knot? pretty gentle for a cowboy.
I'm a girl.
Cowgirl, cow person. And my knot slides right off the rope. Here's where you look stupid, Sheriff. Wave the magic scissors ever so gently over your knot. It's good enough, yeah. And pull the knot off the rope. Give me that. All right, I got one last thing for you, Sheriff. Did you hear about the piece of rope that walked into the saloon?
No.
Walked up to the bartender, said, I want a beer. Bartender said, you're a piece of rope. You can't have a beer. He said, I want a beer. Bartender said, no way, and kicked the piece of rope out. Well, the piece of rope's walking down the road. He sees a friend of his. He tells him the situation. He says, the bartender won't let me have a beer. His friend says, I know what you do. You tie a knot in your center, walk back in there, order a beer again. Well, he does that. He walks back into the saloon. He says, I want a beer. Bartender says, hey, you that same piece of rope that was just in here? Piece of rope says, no. I'm afraid not.
Oh, so good.
Oh, it's terrible. Let's have a big round of applause for Sheriff Ashlyn. Thank you, Ashlyn. What a great sport. Sure.
Those are good scissors.
They're good scissors. I was anxious about TSA, that's for sure. All right, so there was a lot of psychology in there, for sure. I was manipulating your eye movements. I was manipulating how you were processing the information that was arriving to your eyes. There was so much psychology. And in a moment, I'm going to break this down a little bit, but you have to do me a solid. I'm going to give you a little peek behind the curtain, and you have to promise me you won't use this information for evil. That if you go down to the Luxor at Excalibur and you see Mac King on stage there and he does a rope trick like this one, that you don't call him out on his shenanigans. That you applaud when you're supposed to applaud, you laugh when you're supposed to laugh. Can you do that for me? Wonderful, thank you. I don't believe you at all. All right, so our eyes are relatively low resolution devices. Right? We are legally blind in most of our visual field. We only have high acuity vision in one teeny tiny little part of our visual field, a region on the retina known as the fovea, that corresponds to about 2 degrees of your visual world. If you hold your thumb out at arm's length, your thumbnail represents about 2 degrees of your visual world. That's the only part of your visual world where you have high acuity vision. But you feel like you have this rich experience of the world. You don't. It's because you're moving your eyes around. You're moving your eyes around all the time in order to bring different parts of the world into focus on that one little part of your retina where you have high acuity vision. So you're legally blind in much of your visual field. Beyond being legally blind, you are quite literally blind for a big chunk of time. Anytime you're moving your eyes, sensation turns off. Because if it didn't, you would see smears of color across your retina. That's no good. And when you're blinking, every couple seconds, you are literally blind to the world around you. So you have this very degraded, impoverished signal that's arriving to your brain. You have to find order in it. You have to make sense of it. You have to make assumptions. You have to fill in the incomplete information in that visual stimulus. And anytime you're filling in, anytime you're engaging in guesswork, magicians can manipulate that guesswork. Now, around the turn of the 20th century, there was a group of psychologists known as the Gestalt psychologists. It's a German word that roughly translates to organized whole. And they set out to laundry list all of the rules that we apply to the world around us to make sense of incomplete information, all of the assumptions that we make. And I'm going to dig into just one of those today that's relevant to what I just showed you. But first, let's imagine you're coming to visit me in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And you're driving through rural Wisconsin. You see that alongside the road. You process a lot of information from that scene. You note how cute it is that that cow is interested in the duckling. But you're not aware of all the assumptions that your visual system is making. For example, you don't question for a moment whether or not that cow has a midsection. You can't see her midsection. It's behind the fence post. But you implicitly believe it to be there. And beyond just like knowing that it's there, we have all sorts of evidence that your visual system fills in the occluded region of that cow so that you can perceive a complete whole cow. You keep driving, you see that. Again, you don't know what to make of it. Somebody's nailed some sticks to the back of a tree stump, but again, you begin making assumptions. Probably your initial assumption was that that's two straight-ish sticks in an X formation. Well, that's where your perceptual system has led you astray. There's the actual grouping of those sticks. Now, why did you not initially assume this weird, curved grouping of sticks? Well, because that's unlikely, and it's complicated. So, first rule, when you're making assumptions about the world around you, those assumptions are biased towards interpretations that are simple and that are likely. So, you can feel it happening. You felt it. For just a second, you filled in the cow that connected that head with those hindquarters. And then consciousness took the reins and said, oh, no, not possible. Couldn't be that. All right. So this one principle, where you fill in occluded regions in a way that respects smooth continuity over abrupt change, is what the Gestalt psychologists called good continuation. And I believe this is the most exploited psychological principle in all of magic. It's everywhere. And it was there in that trick that your uncle used to terrorize you with when you were a kid, where he removed his thumb. In order to get that trick to work, you have to establish the arrangement in Figure 2. You have to encourage the audience to fill in a complete thumb behind the occluder of your index finger. Because then, when the thumb gets removed, perception and reality don't match, and that is the very definition of illusion. So Gestalt good continuation's all over the place, and I exploited the heck out of it in that rope trick. All right, so frequently, Ashlyn was invited to cut the rope at its center. She did it again and again and again, many times. And that brought us to this arrangement. There's some ambiguity here. You're maybe not sensitive to the fact that there's ambiguity here, but you have incomplete information about the status of these ropes. They're covered up by my hand. And so you have to fill in what's going on behind my hand. And because you have overlearned the Gestalt law of good continuation, you assume that the ropes continue unimpeded behind my hand. That is a simple arrangement. It's a likely arrangement. It is the wrong arrangement in a magic show. In actuality, I have a little rope folded over and a super long rope folded over. So every time Ashlyn was cutting that rope, I engaged in some shenanigans to get her to cut the rope at a spot that wasn't the center of the rope, that allowed me to get to this configuration of a short rope folded over and a long rope folded over. When it came time for me to restore the ropes, all I needed to do was take one end of the long rope, hold it alongside one end of the short rope, let go of stuff, and it seemed like a complete restored rope. Again, good continuation fills in what's going on in my hand in a way that respects smooth continuity over abrupt change. You assume it's a continuous rope, not me holding a little short rope alongside a long rope. All right, so you were making all sorts of assumptions based on incomplete information that you were sampling from the world with your eyeballs. There weren't just perceptual shenanigans afoot either. We'll come back to that in a moment. So this is all over the place. If you have ever seen the dumbest trick in magic, it is the linking ring trick. And I'm about to get blackballed. It's a seriously stupid trick. Because if you force somebody to guess how that trick is done, they'll guess there's a gap in the ring. How's the trick done? There's a gap in the ring. But your brain fills in a complete ring behind the magician's hand. I think it's a dumb trick. And if you go to big stage shows on the strip, you might see tricks like the zigzag illusion. A person's put in a box, they put some blades through there, they remove the midsection, they push it to the side. That's expecting a lot of assumptions out of the audience, though, because you have very little information about how her body is positioned in that box. You have her head, you have her right hand, you have her left hand, you have her left foot. That's it. The rest of her body's covered up. And not surprisingly, the more stuff that's covered up, the less likely people are to use this law of Gestalt good continuation. And so magicians have to come up with hacks, ways to encourage audiences to apply this principle. So how do they do it? They paint a silhouette on the box. The silhouette forces your visual system to adopt one interpretation of how her body must be positioned in that box. For funsies, I photoshopped out the silhouette. It's still a decent trick, but it's weakened substantially without that silhouette. Now your perceptual system is freed up to come up with other possible interpretations of how her body could be positioned in that box to allow the trick to work. Here they are side by side. The one on the left is clearly superior to the one on the right. Okay, so as I mentioned with the rope trick, there were not just perceptual shenanigans afoot, there were attentional shenanigans afoot. Every time I said, draw, partner, what did you do? You looked at Ashlyn. Yeah, you wanted to see her make a fool of herself. Not only did your eyes move to Ashlyn, your attention moved to Ashlyn, and that allowed me to get away with murder. That's when I engaged in the sleight of hand that allowed me to get into that weird orientation with the ropes. I'll give you no more than that so that I don't get blackballed. All right, so let's shift now to how magicians manipulate your attention as well as your perceptions. I'm going to play a video. It's silent. It's short. After you watch the video, I'm going to ask you some questions about what you saw in the video. So pay attention. All right, here's the test. Where was the coin when last you saw it? Was it under the right cup or the left cup? Raise your hand if you last saw the coin under the right cup. Cool, nice. Raise your hand if you last saw the coin under the left cup. We are an audience divided. What the heck? What's going on here? Well, so the people who said it was under the left cup were correct. Let's see if the rest of you can redeem yourselves. We'll watch it again. But now, I want you to just pay attention to the mat. Just focus all your attention on the mat. Ignore all the rest of the actions I'm engaging in. Oh, did you see it that time? Yeah, the coin moved across the mat, right in front of your face. A shiny, moving object, maybe in your peripheral vision. How the heck did you miss that? How did half of you miss that? Well, this is a phenomenon known as inattentional blindness. When we're engaged in an attentionally demanding task, like trying to figure out what the heck I'm up to, we can fail to miss an unexpected event that happens within our field of view. This is a topic that became very popular to study in the 1990s, but it goes way back, long before the 1990s. In fact, this is Alfred Binet, prolific psychologist. If you know Alfred Binet, it's because he was the creator of the first intelligence tests. That's what he's most famous for. But he also wrote a treatise on the psychology of magic. And he's credited with capturing the first moving pictures of a performing magician. And in his 1894 treatise, he said, when it's particularly important that certain peculiarities of a trick be not observed, even in the broad light, matters are so arranged that the attention of the spectator is drawn to another point at the decisive moment, or an appearance of insignificance is given to the act, which produces a relaxation of attention. The attention is thus distracted and deadened. These are the two principal means of rendering invisible a spectacle which is perfectly visible to all eyes. So if you're familiar with inattentional blindness, it's probably because of this video, which was the very first viral video. Your parents probably forwarded an email to everybody in their email book that contained a link to this video in the 90s. It's Dan Simons and Chris Chabris' invisible gorilla demonstration. In that video, participants watched two teams of players passing a basketball around. Their job was to count how many times the players wearing white shirts passed the ball, while ignoring the players wearing black shirts. And half of those people missed a gorilla walking into the scene, beating its chest, and walking off the other side. They missed it because their attention was so focused on the attentionally demanding task of counting the passes of players in white, they filtered out everything that wasn't white, blinding themselves to this gorilla. Well, it's rare for you to be at a basketball game and miss a gorilla walking across the court. Not so rare to be at a magic show and miss all sorts of things that are happening right in front of your face. So I developed this technique that you just saw as a way to study inattentional blindness in the laboratory. Using that coin trick, I have control over far more variables than Dan Simons and Chris Chabris did. I can manipulate what the object is that's moving, the speed that it's moving, the context in which it happens. I have control over so much. And so I've carried out a series of experiments using this to understand the relationship between eye movements and awareness. I have tracked participants' eye movements while they watched versions of this video. And in the very first paper that I published using this technique, I had two different conditions. In what I called the no preview condition, the very first trial that people watched was what you saw. The coin moved the very first time, and if they saw it move, they said it was at its end point. If they didn't see it move, they thought it was a memory test. They said it was at the starting point. In what I called the preview condition, there were 3 control trials before that coin moved. Control trials where nothing happened that was interesting. The coin was placed down, the napkins, the cups, nothing moved, and at the end of each trial, they were asked, hey, where was the coin when last you saw it? Now, why did I have these 2 conditions? Well, there were competing predictions from 2 separate theories, one from the world of magic and one from the world of psychology. On top here is Arturo de Ascanio. He's the father of the Spanish school of magic. Spanish magicians are on another level, right? They approach their magic like a science. They're very impressive, and it's because of the work that Ascanio did in the 1950s and 60s. And he talked about something he called the natural conditioning hypothesis. So let's say you're going to do like a dumb trick, like a vanishing coin. It was dumb. He said if you're going to do a false transfer, I only pretended to transfer the coin, you should condition the audience to accept that action as natural by actually transferring the coin a few times before you engage in the deceptive action. Because then when you engage in the sleight of hand, they'll erroneously group the deceptive action with the non-deceptive action, and they'll be fooled to a greater extent. Sounds good. So by Arturo de Ascanio's theory, repetition of those non-deceptive control trials, so to sort of lull the participants into submission, get them to accept that there's nothing deceptive about the trial structure, and they should be fooled to a greater extent on that 4th trial when the coin moves, compared to the group that sees it move on the first trial. This is Nili Lavie on the bottom. She is a prolific attention researcher. She has the dominant theory of attention today, something called perceptual load theory, and her theory predicts exactly the opposite. What is perceptual load? It's essentially the amount of information you have to take in and process in a particular amount of time. The higher the perceptual load, the less of these attentional resources you have left over to detect the unexpected. Well, let's consider the perceptual load of this task. On the first trial, it's very high. You don't know what's relevant, you don't know what's irrelevant, you don't know what you're going to be asked to do with the information in this video. So it's a very high perceptual load. But with every subsequent trial, that perceptual load shrinks as you kind of tune in to what's relevant and what's irrelevant and what you're going to be asked about at the end of the trial. So Lavie predicts that by that 4th trial, the perceptual load is reduced enough that you have all this attentional capacity left over to detect the unexpected thing. So Ascanio predicts greater inattentional blindness in the no preview condition, or in the preview condition, I'm sorry, and Lavie predicts greater inattentional blindness in the no preview condition. Who's right? We're in Vegas. Put your money where your mouth is. How many believe the magician will be right when we look at the data? I will say I was firmly on the side of Ascanio, but I hold him in high regard. How many believe Lavie has it right? You're once again an audience divided, and many of you are not voting. All right, well, let's take a look at the data. Let's look at the behavioral data, their responses to the question, where was the coin when last you saw it? So I'm plotting the percentage of participants in each group who were blind to the moving coin, who didn't see the coin move. So in that no preview condition, the one you experienced, it produced rates of inattentional blindness similar to the gorilla video and similar to many other inattentional blindness studies. About half of people saw the coin and half of people didn't. In the preview condition, with those control trials, only 6 of 34 people failed to detect that coin. Nilly Lavie wins the day. Yeah, all right. So I mentioned we monitored participants' eye movements because we wanted to examine the relationship between eye movements and awareness in this unusual inattentional blindness task. And looking at eye movements, we replicated some of the previous findings. First, inattentional blindness was unrelated to where you were looking while the coin was moving. People who saw the coin and people who didn't see the coin were looking at approximately the same spot on the screen. This is a messy graphic because there were a lot of conditions going on here. But the yellow dots here are the people who detected the coin. The white dots are the people who didn't detect the coin. And they're basically on top of each other, with the exception of those 2 jokers down at the bottom. They are not statistically different. So what this suggests is everybody was looking at roughly the same spot, but not everybody was attending to the same spot. Some of those people had dissociated their attention from their eye movements, and their attention was in a position that allowed them to detect that moving coin. If we zoom out and we look at eye movements throughout the course of the video, we do see some subtle differences between those who saw the coin and those who didn't. Let's watch the eye movements of one representative participant who was blind to the moving coin. The pink dot tells you where they were looking at every moment during the trick. And you can see they're tracking the action. They're trying to figure out what's relevant here. What's the story to extract? And they're curious about that cup because I'm curious about that cup. And they really lock in on that cup and fail to see the shiny thing moving in their peripheral vision. In that moment, it seems like their attention was locked with their eye movements. They're asked where the coin is, and they get it wrong, and they're pissed. Ugh. All right, now let's look at the representative eye movements of a participant who saw the coin. And I am picking these out because they do represent the eye movements of the group. It looks very similar. They're tracking the action. They're trying to build a narrative to understand what's going on. But their attention isn't as tightly locked to their eye movements. They still fixate the cup, but then they very quickly fixate the end point of the coin's movement. They don't get their eyes down there in time to see the coin moving. They see it moving in peripheral vision and move their eyes to its end point. And they're asked where it is, and they get it right, and they're very happy about it. Okay, so this is problematic, right? We always look at eye movements as a proxy for attention. We assume that people's attention is placed at the same spot that their eyes are at, because that seemed to be the way things worked. But this is problematic, that attention seems to be disengaged from eye movements. Measures of overt attention, like eye movements, are rarely diagnostic of inattentional blindness. This finding that I reported to you, that's shown up with other inattentional blindness tasks. So the differences must lie in covert attention, what your attention is doing independently of your eye movements. Well, covert attention is by definition not measurable by external signs, right? Or is it? we recently turned our attention to a different class of eye movements, a rather understudied class of eye movements. Even when your eyes are fixated on something, they're not still. They're usually twitching a little bit. And these little twitches, they're called microsaccades. And people used to think that these microsaccades really just serve to keep your photoreceptors from adapting, to just slightly shift where the image is falling upon your retina so that you don't tax those photoreceptors too much. And that's true, they're doing that. But they're serving a variety of other functions too. It turns out they help us scan small regions of space, perhaps, thereby enhancing visual acuity a little bit. They drive this thing called the rotating snakes illusion. They're not moving. You perceive them to be moving because of the color contrasts and the little twitches your eyes are making. When you're not making microsaccades, they're not moving. But most importantly, some have suggested that microsaccades might point to where your covert attention is placed. Microsaccades have a direction to them. Most of them are horizontal, probably because we live in a world on a horizontal plane, but occasionally there are vertical ones. And some folks have suggested that the direction of a microsaccade points to where your attention is placed independently of your fixation. And so, with my colleagues Steve Macknick and Susanna Martinez-Conde, we set out to explore this. We used that same coin trick, but these eye movements, they're so small, they're so subtle, you can't pick them up in a one-trial experiment. Too much noise. So it couldn't be a magic trick anymore. Nobody was fooled by this trick anymore. They had to watch many, many trials. Sometimes the coin moved, sometimes the coin didn't move. They had to monitor for that coin's movement. Meanwhile, we added a task to the cups. They had to do a delayed match to sample task. So in the first cup, there was a circular array of dots. In the easy condition, there were 2 dots. In the hard condition, there were 6 dots. They had to try to encode the positions of those dots, because in the second cup, there would be 1 colored dot in 1 position. Participants had to say whether that colored dot appeared at that position in the first cup. It's a super hard task. Here, try it for yourselves. What do you think? Was the white dot in that position in the first cup? I think it was. I honestly don't remember. I think it was a yes. And then they had to say where the coin was. All right. So first, people could do the task. It wasn't such a hard task that people couldn't do it. Yes, accuracy varied as a function of whether it was a hard trial or an easy trial. But even in the hard condition, people got it right 2/3 of the time, which is well above chance, given 6 positions within that cup. So they could do it, for sure. So what did their eye movements tell us? Well, first, this is unrelated to the hypothesis we really set out to test, but it was cool. Microsaccade rates predicted success in the match to sample task. If they made more microsaccades while they were looking at the first cup, they were more likely to get that match to sample task right when they saw the second cup. So yeah, you see it on the right here. The red line, which represents correct trials, is higher than the blue line, which represents incorrect trials. So this supports the notion that microsaccades reflect the scanning of small regions of space. That's cool. But what about what we really cared about? Do microsaccades index covert attention? I think they do. The moment when participants needed to begin dividing attention between the cup and the space through which the coin could move, their microsaccades shifted from horizontal to vertical. So this plot is showing deviation from horizontal on the y-axis. The x-axis is time. The 0 point is the onset of the stimulus in the cup, in the first cup, and the possibly moving coin. And you see much larger vertical components at that point in the video. Down below are those polar histograms. Those also show the direction of these microsaccades, and you can see it happening. At that 0 point, there's a downward bias to these microsaccades because they're looking here, but they're trying to attend down here. And over time, they then shift back up to continue scanning the stimuli in the cup. So this is pretty cool. This suggests, indeed, that these microsaccades have a relationship to our covert attention, that covert attention isn't as covert as we used to think it was. And further, the thing I'm proud of is that this is the very first study to explore microsaccades in a relatively naturalistic task with video and dynamic stuff. So pretty proud of that. So before I pivot to a related topic, I want to give you some interstitial conclusions. First, these eye movements, they're there to help us construct an internal representation of the external world. We're sampling from different regions of the world to try to piece together this best guess at what's out in front of us. But it is a guess. There's guesswork involved. You have to make assumptions based on your prior experience. And those assumptions, those guesses, can be easily exploited by magicians. Second, these gross eye movements that you make, these big eye movements, they are correlated with attention, for sure, which many of our experiments count on, but it's an imperfect correlation. Your attention isn't always linked to where your eyes are fixated. You can use your peripherals, as some have said. But microsaccades can help us know where your attention is placed independently of those eye movements. Okay, so it's clear that magicians are using their eye movements to impact your eye movements, thereby impacting how you sample information from the world. That is without question. I want to turn my attention now to a less studied aspect of eye movements, blinking behaviors. People who study eye movements, they're almost exclusively studying these saccades, these big jumps that your eyes make. They're studying fixations, the things your eyes land on. Some of them are studying microsaccades. Nobody's studying when your eyes are closed. They're throwing out those samples from the eye tracker. But when your eyes are closed can tell us something about what's going on in your mind. So your eye movements, or your blinks, are primarily there to moisten your eyeballs. Yeah, we know that. But the timing of those blinks is non-random. Blinks can happen for a couple different reasons. They can happen because of exogenous cues. This is just like stuff out in the world, like the puff of air that goes into your eye at the optometrist, right? These are reflexive, these are involuntary, these are not particularly interesting to me. What I'm interested in is those endogenous blinks. These are blinks that you're programming, that are not reflexive, that are perhaps strategic, though not conscious, and that are predictive. It turns out you time your blinks to coincide with moments when you don't expect useful information to be presenting itself to you in the environment. So if you feel like nothing important is happening, you start blinking. You wait to blink until nothing interesting is happening. So if a magician can make it seem like there's nothing interesting to see here, you will literally blind yourself to moments when the magician can be engaged in deceptive actions. Eye blinks index thought. We now have all sorts of evidence that you'll wait until difficult cognitive processing is over to engage in a bunch of blinking behaviors. So your rate of blinking tells us how deeply you're thinking about something. So not so long ago, I turned my attention to the blinking behaviors of performing magicians. And this was inspired by something from the magic literature. This is Jay Sankey, a prolific magician and magic theorist, and in one of his books, he said, "Just as Narcissus became obsessed with his own reflection in the waters and eventually drowned, so too do some magicians succumb to their practice mirrors and come to unconsciously edit their own experience of their sleights, rendering them virtually invisible." How? By blinking. Jay Sankey observed that when magicians are rehearsing their sleight of hand in front of a mirror so that they can get the perspective of the audience, that they'll frequently blink the moment they carry out a piece of sleight of hand. thereby blinding themselves to any evidence that they suck at that sleight of hand. It seems very much like an instance of self-deception. And when I started looking into this, I looked to the literature on self-deception, and I found it is weak. There is weak evidence for the existence of strong self-deception, where a person both knows the truth and pushes that truth out of their consciousness. Yeah, there are all sorts of weak forms of self-deception, but that strong form, there's almost no evidence for. I thought if we can demonstrate this phenomenon in magicians, we've got it. We've got the smoking gun for an instance of deep self-deception. So we got ourselves a handful of magicians. And this is my collaborator, Sean Eric. He's a beast with coins. He's got little baby hands, but he does amazing things with coins. And he and I gave 10 magicians a week to learn a difficult coin magic routine that we developed. And some of the pieces of sleight of hand in this coin routine were commonplace, every magician should know them, and some of them were things we invented to just be hard, that nobody would have familiarity with, that would require a lot of effort for them to get good at. So we gave them 1 week to learn this because we didn't want them to be great at it. And then we brought them into the lab and we videotaped them performing this coin routine in front of a mirror where they had full visual feedback of what they were doing, and in front of a camera. We just removed the mirror. And later on, a research assistant and I coded blink behavior frame by frame. 100,000 frames of video. Here were our hypotheses. Oh yeah, we filmed them twice, I told you that. We predicted that 1, blink rates should increase when participants were engaged in deceptive action, right? That's what Jay Sankey's hypothesis would predict. But we also predicted that this increase would be magnified in the rehearsal setting compared to the performance setting, because they should be editing their visual experience when the mirror's there. And finally, we predicted that these blink rates should increase with the difficulty of the sleight. With these hard sleights, there should be more motivation to self-deceive, right? And they're definitely not going to be good at these after a week of practice. So we analyzed these frames. What I'm calling the experimental frames were frames from the video that happened while they were engaged in deceptive action. The control frames are frames from the video where they weren't engaged in deceptive action. And the x-axis here is the condition they were in, rehearsal versus performance. The first prediction was indeed borne out in the data. What's being plotted here is the proportion of time spent blinking. And the average of those gray bars is higher than the average of those white bars. They did blink more when they were engaged in deceptive action than when they weren't. So hypothesis 1 was confirmed, but you're noticing something very strange here. That difference only shows up in the performance condition, not in the rehearsal condition. This is exactly opposite of our hypothesis. So prediction 2 was not confirmed by these data. Turning to prediction 3, we hypothesized that blink rates would increase with the difficulty of the sleight. We had a separate group of magicians rate the difficulty of these sleights, and your eyeballs tell you there's a positive correlation there. The more difficult the sleight on the x-axis, the greater the proportion of time they had their eyes closed on the y-axis. So that one was confirmed. So what the heck is going on here? People blinked more in experimental frames than control frames, but that was only apparent in the performance condition, not the rehearsal condition. This kind of blinking doesn't seem like self-deception. They're not deceiving themselves because they're not doing it when they have full visual feedback. Something else is going on here, and I can only opine on it. We haven't done experiments to confirm this. I suspect that these performers are blinking to telegraph to the audience that there's nothing to see here, that this is a moment when you too can blink. And you should be skeptical of this claim. It seems odd, but there is in fact evidence that audiences entrain their blinks to those of a speaker. Probably you're doing it right now if you're close enough to see my eyes blinking. Nakano and Kitazawa showed this, that audience members blinked a fraction of a second after a performer blinked if those blinks happened at the end of an idea or during complete silence. That's what these two bars represent there. So in those situations, audience member blinks entrain to performer blinks. So it's not absurd to think that magicians might be unconsciously using their blinking behaviors to telegraph that this is a moment you can relax, that there's nothing to see here, thereby blinding the audience to their deceptive actions, quite literally. Okay, so some grand conclusions. We're all mind readers. We're using other people's eyes to gauge their mental states, to understand what they're thinking about. We're really good at this, even though we don't think we are. Indeed, the eyes are a wealth of information. We can get so much information about what a person's thinking based on what their eyes are doing. They are a direct window to cognitive processes. Eyes can aid in deception, as they do with a magician and a rope trick like this, but they can also perhaps point to deceit. If you go to see a magician on the strip and they're blinking, try not to entrain your blinks to theirs if you don't want to be deceived. It's more fun to be deceived, though. And finally, I hope I've convinced you the magicians are a source of useful scientific insight. They've been neglected by science for a very long time, but they have hypotheses that are just laying there that can potentially be integrated into formal psychological theories. They can speed our rate of scientific discovery if we begin exploring some of this folk psychology. So with that, I thank you for your kind attention, and I wish you sweet dreams. Thank you. And by my read, I've got 5 minutes for some questions, if you have questions for me. Oh, she's got a good one.
I had a confounding thought about the first
Yes.
time viewing the coin trick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've set the stage. We all see what we think we see.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who thought it was on the right side would say, aha, this is a magic trick, so it has to be on the left side.
Oh, yeah. So it was important that these data were collected in a laboratory that people had no idea did anything associated with magic. So these were detected, these happened in a laboratory that studied mostly memory and some other things. Magic wasn't a piece of it. Nobody came in expecting that this was going to be about magic, and they were definitely not told that it was about magic. That was a worry. I didn't want people to assume that there's something deceptive going on. However, yeah, that would weaken the finding if that had happened.
Thank
Correct.
you.
Thank
That
you
was
for that
great.
observation. Yeah, we were worried about that one too. So, that's a reason I'm now at a small liberal arts college with 2,600. I can't do that. They all know who I am. They all know I'm up to shenanigans. So I can no longer use that method. If I want to use this method, I have to have a colleague at another institution collect the data. Yeah, it's rough. Hi.
I appreciate this. Are there vocal cues that are the equivalent of a blink?
Vocal cues that are the equivalent of a blink.
Like the reason I ask is sometimes you'll talk to somebody and they'll hear about half of what you say.
Yeah, sure. I mean, silence itself, the end of an idea is a cue that now is a moment when we can blink. I don't know, I can't off the top of my head think of any kind of linguistic cues beyond silence and culminating an idea that magicians use to induce this kind of relaxation. There are lots of physical cues. Like magicians are very sensitive to the state of tension in their body. And so when they want the audience to be attending, they'll be physically tense. And when they want the audience to be missing something, they'll relax. Yeah. Yes.
Very fun presentation. I'm wondering if the ability here to evaluate essentially attention, it could also be applied to evaluate folks like test pilots or sharpshooters who have to have big situational awareness
Yeah.
and not be deceived and to really be able to pay attention. I wonder if they score differently on this, and perhaps for people that are not, for people that do score well on this, if they might, actually this is more inherent capability for them to do those types of professions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a direct answer to it because nobody, to my knowledge, has. Okay, no, that's not true. So the invisible gorilla thing with the basketballs, they did this with like legitimate basketball players and novice basketball players and non-basketball players. And those expert basketball players detected the gorilla more readily because the primary task of counting the passes didn't suck up as much of the attentional resources because they have this expertise. And so those people detected the gorilla. The novices and the people who don't play basketball, most of them did not see the gorilla. Their rates were similar to the 50-50 rate that we saw in the original experiment. I have not used my method to explore expertise effects, but I think your hypothesis is a good one. There's lots of work going on with TSA agents, in fact, because, I mean, there are high stakes with that kind of visual search. They can't afford to be inattentionally blind to some water bottle in your in your baggage or a bomb. And so there's all sorts of work being done to try to get these TSA agents to sort of recalibrate so as not to be inattentionally blind. And there's some good work going on there. They're finding some good hacks to help improve TSA agents' ability to detect the unexpected.
Oh, that's great. One would hope that pro basketball players would realize that there's a gorilla on the
That's
court.
right. Yeah, fair. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, I've got 50 seconds.
Real quick question, and it was about the magicians that had learned the series of corn tricks and the fact that the second hypothesis seemed to be disproved. Could it be a conscious affectation that they're using in order to increase the audience's inattention rather than a sort of an unconscious effect? And could you maybe test that with teaching non-magicians who wouldn't have the impetus to employ that?
Yeah. I'm skeptical that it's a conscious thing these magicians are doing because we are mostly not aware of anything that our eyes are doing, and it's really hard for us to control what our eyes are doing. Yes, magicians have a lot of practice controlling what their eyes are pointed at. I do not think that they're consciously blinking, but it's worth exploring for sure. For what it's worth, none of the participants in that experiment knew what the hypothesis was. We asked them, what do you think we were testing here? None of them said anything to do with blinks. Not that doesn't directly relate to what you're asking, but I think it's an important point.
But magicians never reveal their secrets, right?
Fair, you win. All right, thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'll see you at the party. Thank you.